Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, and it's time for WoW, from the womb to the world, and especially for amazement, for looking at the brain and going, wow. This is done in collaboration with the Baby Lab at the University of Essex, and today we have a very special guest, Federica Meconi, who is a senior research fellow at the University of Trento. We spent quite a few hours fighting with brainwaves in a lab many years ago, many lives ago. And it's amazing to be here today together. And Federica is the expert on empathy today. So would you like to tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you from beautiful Rome to also beautiful Birmingham?
So hello, and thanks so much for inviting me. Yes, I started with you many years ago now. What did it bring me here? It's a long story. After finishing my university studies, I did a year of internship in a center for anti-violence for victims of intimate partner violence. And that was quite an intense experience, to be honest. And in that case, not every time it was not in every case it was really easy for me to empathize with all the women that came to our service. So and I found myself wondering a lot about how that could be, how could that happen in first place. And I think I understood that only when I got very close to a friend of mine who got into a violent relationship. And in that case, I realized that maybe one of the reasons why I couldn't really always understand what these women were feeling and empathize with them was because probably I never had myself that experience. But then I realized that this was not absolutely a trivial question to ask, because so how would the psychotherapists do their job? Do they really need the full range of human experiences to be able to do well their job, right? So to empathize with their patients, do they need every kind of human experience? So what I did was I started my path in the attempt to answer this question. So I started my PhD studies in Padova. And my main topic was about empathy for physical pain. But then to really answer my question, I needed to get more into the memory domain. So I came to Birmingham in the amazing memory lab that we have here. In the attempt to answer whether memories, our past experiences, the autobiographical memories, were involved in any way in our ability to empathize. So that's how I got here.
And this is very interesting for us parents as well, because we often feel the need to empathize with our children. Sometimes we get frustrated because we can't. Sometimes we wonder if we do it too much, and then we kind of lose control. And knowing or reflecting about our own past experience and how that influences empathy is actually a topic that that can really set our little wheels in motion as well, because I don't know, for instance, I have 3 children, 3 very different characters, and I know that it's very immediate to feel similarly to one in some situation, to another one in some other situation, when something that I've lived it kind of clicks with what they are living right now. But it's not all there is somehow. And so we're very happy to have you here today to ask you what it is what is exactly empathy and how you describe it and how you define it, and are there different types? What do we do with them?
Yes, so it's a very important question, in a sense that if you tried to ask several people what they think empathy is, you would get as many answers as the number of people you actually interviewed. So it's really difficult to find a consensus on what is empathy, also because it's been studied for centuries now. So, but we can say that at least in the last decade, we reached a consensus in defining empathy as the ability to share the other's experiences, which happens via a mechanism of inner simulation, for example. So it resonates with us what the other is feeling, and with the ability to explicitly understand what the other is feeling, or the other's minds and inner states more broadly. So this is what we can say empathy is. It's important to realize that it's a multifaceted concept that can happen in different ways, that one doesn't mean that the other cannot happen, or the other way around. They don't need to work together. They are separate and dissociable aspects. We could observe this dissociation under an anatomical point of view, but also under a functional point of view. And it's always important to remember that the fact that we cannot really simulate what the other is feeling, so we cannot have an understanding that comes from the inside, doesn't mean that we can still not understand what the other is thinking, for example. These are two different aspects, and we can reach the same ability to be in an appropriate and accurate interaction, even by using only one way to empathize. And and another aspect of empathy that we always need to keep in mind is that it can also cause us a lot of distress, for example. So it's not always super helpful to be very empathic, right? Because there are situations in which over arousal that comes from emotionally engaging stimuli can be overwhelming, and so and this would be detrimental for our ability to translate our empathy into prosocial behavior or behavioral help.
So what we tend to kind of describe often to parents as, if your friend has fallen into a well, rather than throwing a rope for him to climb up, you go into the well together with him. So that's kind of the idea of this huge empathy that it's comes natural. And I think parents are very well placed to know there's huge empathy, this big suffering or big happiness as well that can come over you, and that sometimes it's fantastic to share it, and sometimes not quite so. So when we were chatting the other day, you mentioned two big words, but they are probably worth knowing for many parents. It was the kind of visceral empathy and then the more cognitive sort of empathy. Could you kind of give us a little description of each of them?
Yes, so let's have an example that maybe is helpful. So let's, for example, think of situation. Let's put memory into place again. So let's think, for example, of a situation in which we encounter somebody that tells us about, I don't know, they just got this bone broken, like an arm broken. And you immediately, if you had that bone broken as well, you immediately recall that. It can be quite spontaneous. And this feeling that you happen to feel in response to this friend that was so unlucky could be interpreted as a visceral kind of reaction. But more generally, a visceral aspect of empathy can also be felt for situations in which you feel very close to the target of empathy, so to the person who's actually perceiving in first-hand an emotion, for example. And the psychological distance is a real concept, is our ability to feel somebody far or close to the self in the here and now. And this can happen also, for example, for, feeling of similarity. And this can also have this feeling of similarity can also happen only for facial features, for example. One nice example that I always like to bring up is that, for example, there are faces that only for their facial resemblance, for our physical resemblance, they are perceived within a fraction of a second as more trustworthy or less untrustworthy. And it depends on the line of the eyebrows, on how pronounced are the cheekbones or the chin, and the shape of the nose, scallion. And it doesn't have anything to do with the personality. Still, since you perceive yourself as more trustworthy, you would tend to see that person that looks trustworthy to you as more similar to yourself. And this would trigger more empathy when compared to less trustworthy looking faces. When we go on to the cognitive aspect of empathy, this is a very big word. It's a very broad word, because it's not only about having just an understanding. So you cannot really feel inside what the other is feeling, but you can still have an understanding of that. So, for example, you can generalize from your own experiences, even though you don't have a perfect match with the other's experience. But it can also be our ability to think what the other is thinking, for example. This is called theory of mind. And in the theory of mind, what you actually do is to try to form a correct representation of what the other is thinking, based on your knowledge, for example. So we can distinguish between the affective and the cognitive aspect of empathy when you have, for example, different anatomical reactions. So your brain reacts differently between the affective and the cognitive aspect of empathy, but also the kind of process, it's very different, because in one case you have this resonance in your inner self, and in another case, the cognitive aspect of empathy, you have an explicit inference and understanding of the other's thoughts. It doesn't necessarily have to be emotion. It can be anything.
Yeah. And so how do you measure those?
In different ways, in several ways. In my particular case, so we have a lot of techniques that are able to track and monitor an empathic reactions. We have several neuroscientific techniques, but it can also be tracked just by asking people what they think, how they feel. And in my specific case, I use the electroencephalography. I used to use the electroencephalography, which is a non-invasive technique. It measures it records the electrical activity that is spontaneously generated by the brain by putting a cap on the head of the participants. This cap has a lot of sensors that are called electrodes, and they only have the ability to record the activity. They don't stimulate the brain in any way. We record this activity from the surface, from the scalp, and we can analyze the electrical activity in such a way that when you present a stimulus on the screen, the spontaneous electrical activity has systematic fluctuations that happen in response to that stimulus. So you can actually isolate that response and see how it differs in different conditions. In our case, in my case, I usually study empathy for pain. So most of the times my stimuli are just faces, only the faces also, with a neutral or a painful expression. And I monitor the electrical activity simultaneously with the onset of the stimulus when it is shown on the computer screen, and I see how two waves, one wave in particular differs in one condition, the painful expression, compared to the neutral condition, so the neutral expression.
So what you're saying is that as soon as I see a face, even if I'm outside your lab, I see a face with a neutral expression or with a painful expression, and this means that then my brain waves change immediately already, just by seeing a face.
Yes, I mean, we can say that. Of course, on a laboratory basis, you need a lot of repetitions to see that that processing happening, of course. But yes, we can say that that's what happens. You actually process every single stimulus.
Yeah.
In this case, would be, for example, according to saliency of the stimulus. So a painful expression, the saliency. So how salient is?
No, I just wanted to ask if we can see one of those waves, because it sounds really exciting.
Yes, of course. I prepared it for you. Just a second to try to do. So that's our wave. I don't know how well you can see.
We can
so this is one wave, the blue one, and the other wave is the red one, and these are the two waves responding to a salient stimulus. So, for example, a painful expression, and to the neutral stimulus. So, for example, the neutral expression. And because of the nature of the electroencephalography, what we can only be interested in this particular case is the difference between the amplitude of these two waves. So the fact that there is a difference tells us that the brain is processing these two stimuli in a different way.
Wow.
So, and this is usually an index of the motivated attention, the wave I have just shown you. So this means that we can really allocate more attentive resources to something that is really salient to us, when compared to something that is less salient within the same context.
Okay. And empathy kind of modulates that.
Well, we can say that this is a precursor of our empathic ability. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not the other way around.
First comes the different. So if we pay more attention, we are then more likely to be empathic, right? Is that what you mean?
Well, we can say that, I mean, we can certainly say something like that. It always depends on the context in which you are studying or addressing a specific question. But yes, we can say that on a general basis, putting attention into something increases the likelihood to observe an empathic reaction.
Yeah. So we had a question from a mom asking, what impacts does this all science have on the way I parent my child, already knowing that attention can be this precursor of empathy potentially, and then of pro-social behavior, meaning of kind of a positive, helpful behavior for the other person. is probably a really interesting nugget to take home.
Yes, and I would like to say also that in the case of parenting, it's always important to remember that the empathic reaction that you have from the arousing stimuli, that in the case of a parent would be, for example, a crying infant, it's always important to realize that it's that this reaction that the moms have should not be extremely high, in a sense that it's much more effective and much more helpful also for the mother to be able to regulate this emotional reaction that they experience in order to reach a moderate reaction and be effective in their parenting behavior. Yeah. So, and this is true also for the fathers, for example. It's been studied.
Yes, and this it's something extremely interesting. It has been studied as well by the team of Erika Barba-Müller and Elserino Exema, where they show that really the mother brain kind of gets tuned to be able to be at the same time extremely alert, but extremely calm as well. Yeah. So it's important, as you say, to be aware of what's going on, and at the same time not to make the child's reaction your own, or even amplify that child's reaction, but work at regulating it. And as a mom of 3 children, aged around 8 years old, I mean, it's impossible. That's where we should tend, right? Like it's helpful to think that this is it's a good idea to keep in mind, and then probably many parents know how difficult it is to.
I can only imagine.
Regulation is quite a challenge, yes. But it's an important one, so thank you for reminding us. Yes, and so if you had, so in a way, we have the visceral, affective kind of empathy, and then we have this more cognitive kind of I know, I can imagine based on my knowledge of how these people feel, and then I can act upon them. So this already answers a question that one of our reader posed about, empathy does not only mean feeling other people's emotion. And yes, thank you for explaining this much wider spectrum to us. But then to go back to your initial question, which was, so how do the psychotherapists do they have to know everything? Which type of empathy is more useful in different situations? Would you be able to?
I'm not a psychotherapist, even though I'm trying to study for it. But it's really difficult to answer this question, also because it's not extremely clear yet whether memory is really involved in empathy, and if so, to what extent. So I would say, hoping that I'm not inaccurate in saying that, but I would say that certainly the empathic feeling of a psychotherapist would certainly be something that they learn to. They also train to feel in their inner self. And they also have the ability to distinguish well between an empathic reaction and something that simply reminds them to something that happened to them, because that could also be very detrimental in the attempt to empathize with the other, right? Because you can have the same experience but have a different emotional content associated with that. So the emotion of the same event is not the same. And so using your own memory to understand what the other is feeling can also not be helpful, or on the contrary, be detrimental, as I said before. So this is one thing that we can say, but it's also important to remember that that empathy helps us in the social interaction or in the interpersonal interaction more broadly. So this means that it's adaptable in a sense, no? It should be adaptable or as adaptable as possible. And so sometimes it's also a matter of what is the problem that we are addressing, right? Because some psychotherapists or theoretical accounts would tell that you can always generalize from your own knowledge. So a very expert in life kind of psychotherapist would be very good at generalizing and being able to represent and understand and also feel what the patient is feeling. But on the other side, it could also, for example, in the social services or in the anti-violence center where I worked for a year, it could also be important to know what is the problem and sometimes be just firm and know what to do. And this is what really helps the relationship with the user or the patient or whatever,
and then
whoever it is.
With the parents as well, right? There are situations where we to just be there with pain or the happiness or the disappointment or whatever it is, and some other cases where we have to step out of that feeling, of that emotion, and cognitively work out what needs to be done and kind of take the lead out of that emotional jam in a way.
Yeah, it's always important to remember though that empathy really what I would say, so Edith Stein in the early years of the 20th century would say that empathy is what reveals us the person, right? So it's always important to remember that empathy can really be a tool that helps us in understanding what the other is going through in any case, no? So it's an important step. And it's a very fast and quick response. As I said, it can happen within a fraction of a second, really. We have all the ingredients to become empathic within a fraction of a second, really. So if on the one side it's important to have an empathic reaction or an empathic ability in the interaction, is also, on the other hand, it's important to remember that you don't need to be distressed or overwhelmed or only feeling with the other, but you can also do something for it. You can also translate this feeling into helping behavior, and so be effective within the interaction. So yes, as you were saying, you can use this as an information to guide your behavior later on. Yes, I think I said.
Great. This is it's a really passionating a topic that is really at the heart of I guess everybody's life, right? It's what we care most about are probably our relationship, whether we want to admit it or not, and whether that's reflected in the way we spend our time or not. So thank you so much for sharing with us all this knowledge. Before we let you go, can we ask you for one thing that nobody should ignore about empathy?
Yes, I think I would say that always remember that even if you cannot really feel what the other is feeling, you can always still understand it if you try.
Thank you. We're gonna try very hard then.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here as well today, and all the best to you, and enjoy the weekend.
Thanks, and you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.